Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more of the Great War. This time we're on to week 40. The sea turns red. Landing at Gallipoli. So it's finally happening. I always forget. I'm never good with years or dates. I don't even remember the years or dates really that I wrote in my thesis. And again, I wrote my thesis a year ago now. Yeah, time is moving too quick. I don't like it. So yeah, 2015, 1915. Oh, all right. If that's any sign for how well my brain is gonna be for this video. Oh boy. Now this is the first time it's happened for the Great War series for me. Is that I got when I clicked on this video, YouTube was like, "Hey, are you sure you want to watch this? This video is mature, I guess, or whatever." But didn't get that for the Armenian Genocide. And what happens usually in videos that discuss genocide or the disease currently plaguing our world at the time of recording this, is that YouTube will typically, especially if it's covering mature content or trying to combat possible misinformation, they put a Wikipedia article at the bottom, right? Like the Armenian Genocide video of the Great War had a Wikipedia link for Wikipedia's article on the Armenian Genocide. And again, Wikipedia is not a bad source anymore. It used to be in like the late 2000s, early 2010s. It's not anymore. It is very hard to edit an article now. And even if you put in wrong information, that shit usually gets caught so fast. So yeah, just a reminder, Wikipedia is pretty trustful now. Especially because they also link all the sources at the bottom of the article, so it's like you can fact check it yourself. Anyways, yeah. But this video, I didn't see any Wikipedia articles, so I'm like, all right, so it's flagged for adults, but no Wikipedia article. What is being discussed here that gets bad? Do they show some images of dead bodies worse than they've done before? Because they've shown some pretty gruesome pictures in this series. Yet nothing that's flagged their videos where I've had to be like, yes, I want to watch. Anyways, that was a 3-minute ramble. So yeah, let's go ahead and dive right in.
This week begins with a single word. A word that reverberates 100 years later, often in romantic tales, that showed the might of colonial troops, that brought new heroes to the international spotlight and shame to old ones. One word that the world is not likely to forget: Gallipoli.
The Australians and New Zealanders certainly aren't going to forget that thing.
I'm Indy Nidell.
Ooh.
Welcome to the Great War. When we left off, the Second Battle of Ypres had begun. The first German offensive on the Western Front this year, while days before, the British had...
Really? It is the first offensive of the Germans in 1915? Huh. They've been pretty passive on the Western Front, it seems.
mined the Germans from below at Hill 60. At Ypres, the Germans used poison gas successfully for the first time in the war with devastating effect, but their progress was stalled by Canadian forces.
Oh,
in the
Canada.
east, the Austrians and Germans were building up for yet another attempt to push the Russians out of the mountains. In Africa, Union forces were routing the Germans, and in eastern Turkey, the Armenian city of Van was under heavy siege by the Turks. I'll start right with the big news of the week, the moment many of you have been waiting for months: the Gallipoli landings. On April 25, 1915, French, British, Australian, and New Zealander forces landed in the Straits of the Dardanelles. The same day, the Russian Black Sea...
All right, so it definitely was a multinational effort in terms of forces committed. But why is it always seen as an Australian and New Zealander thing? Because I've always heard, especially when talking about Gallipoli in the past, it's pretty much the Australians and New Zealanders that are put at the forefront. The British are like, they provided a navy, right? They came up with the plan, right? But it's the Australians and New Zealanders that died. The French are like never mentioned. So I'm curious if he addresses that here.
Fleet bombarded the Turkish forts on the Bosporus. This was part of a campaign to seize Istanbul and knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war. Okay, the landings. 2 separate landing areas were chosen, one at Cape Helles at the southern tip, and one further north across from the town of Maidos. The idea was that the attack from the south would push the Turks back to the northern landing, and they'd be trapped.
That's a really... Why not sail up here, not into the Sea of Marmara, because that's very narrow. Why not go here, along up here? It seems just such a narrow point, which makes it much easier for the Turks to defend. Now, of course, the prevailing sentiment towards Turkish troops at this point in time is that the Turks are an incompetent military right now, is the viewpoint of the Entente. But still, even with that, why not? Is the landings up here too treacherous, too like mountainous, cliffy, and this is like the only spot that has reasonable landing terrain? It just seems such a narrow point.
The landing on the northern beach, codenamed Z Beach, took place just before dawn. Now, 2 months earlier, Lord Kitchener, British Secretary of State for War, who didn't think much of either Turkish military skills or British colonial armies, had sarcastically claimed that the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps troops, Anzacs, would be adequate for a cruise in the Marmara. And so it was they, diverted from heading to the Western Front to fight this supposedly quick and easy battle against the Turks, who were put ashore. But not at the proposed landing site, Gallipoli, which would have led to an advance across level ground, but further north at Ari Burnu, beneath the heights of Chunuk Bair. Commander Charles Dix, in charge of the landing, said straight off the bat, "Tell the colonel that the damn fools have landed us a mile too far north." The landing spot would be christened Anzac Cove. The landing itself was mostly unopposed, but after a few hours, the Turkish battery near Gallipoli began shelling the soldiers on the landing beach. Those men began to push inland, taking heavier casualties, but still pressing on, up steep terrain, trying to take the high ground. Late in the afternoon, the Turks holding the crest ran out of ammunition and began to withdraw. Now, as some Australian troops approached the crest, a Turkish divisional commander named Mustafa Kemal, who would one day be known as Ataturk, the father of all Turks, reached the men who were pulling out, and since they had no ammunition, he ordered them to halt, fix bayonets, and lie down facing the enemy. As soon as they lay down, so did the enemy, giving the Turks some time. One of Kemal's top regiments was on the eastern slopes of Chunuk Bair at the time, and they managed to arrive at the crest before the Australians could with a battery of guns. Kemal realized that if the crest were not held, then the whole position on the peninsula might be lost. 1 Turkish and 2 Arab regiments soon arrived as reinforcements, and the fighting continued the rest of the day. To say it was bloody was an understatement.
I really should watch a video on Ataturk sometime. I'm surprised I haven't yet.
Wave after wave of Turks and Arabs threw themselves down on the Anzacs, were destroyed by machine gun fire, and then more men climbed over the bodies of the previous wave. There was no rest, and by nightfall, both sides were completely exhausted. Kemal tried to get his men to continue the fight, but nobody would or even could. The Ottoman forces still held the crest, while the Anzacs held the western slopes of Chunuk Bair. General Sir Ian Hamilton, when informed of the situation, said that it was okay because the southern force that would advance in the morning should take off the pressure. This was about as optimistic as one could possibly be. At W Beach, it was the Lancashire Fusiliers who went ashore, rowing the final distance. However, the preliminary naval bombardment had neither eliminated the barbed wire nor the Turkish defenders, who waited in silence until suddenly sweeping the beach with machine guns.
Ooh.
The men were so tightly packed in their boats that some dead men continued to sit upright. The water was deep, so many men leaving the boats with 70 pounds of equipment drowned. Many were killed trying to pass the barbed wire. In fact, by the time the beach was secure, of 950 men landing, well over half had been killed or wounded.
I mean, at least it was only half. Could be worse. Yeah.
Victoria Crosses were awarded to the Fusiliers for bravery that day, and the beach was...
Woo! I got a medal for watching my friends die in front of me. Yay!
known in future as Lancashire Landing. The initial landing attempt saw the invaders enfiladed and cut down in droves from 4 Maxim guns placed in a Turkish fort and a castle covering the beach from the left and the right. Well, those that actually made it ashore. The Turks in the fort were not forced back and the landing not really secure till the following day. Now the other 3 beaches, S, X, and Y, were hardly defended, and eventually...
Do we have an E beach?
The Turks on W Beach were outflanked by...
Oh, come on, Britain. You had a perfect opportunity. Why W? This doesn't even make sense alphabetically because you're missing a T. You're missing a U and a V too. What's the point of using S? God. First you drive on the wrong side of the road, and now you don't even know how to name your landing points, funnily.
Allied troops from other beaches and beaten back by
Oh,
forces that soon outnumbered them 10-1.
Where's you?
And as the various beachheads were linked up, it seemed that the Allies, in spite of the carnage, might manage to push the Turks far back and take all the forts on the European side of the straits. The fleet could then sail into Istanbul. Indeed, by sunset on the 26th, the Allies had landed more than 30,000 troops. However, they had also suffered more than 20,000 dead and wounded.
Oh no.
Here's an account from that day I found in Martin Gilbert's The First World War. Men had lost arms and legs. Brains oozed out of shattered skulls, and lungs protruded from riven chests. Many had lost their faces and were unrecognizable to their friends. One poor chap had lost his nose and most of his face, and we were obliged to take off an arm, the other hand, and extract 2 bullets like shark's teeth from his thigh. I saw him the next morning being carried to the mortuary. The Ottoman force...
I think I know why this video got flagged for them now. Oh. Yeah, that's a vivid image. Yeah. I'm not hungry for lunch anymore, no. Nope. Oh, Ugh. My breakfast isn't happy in my stomach after hearing that. Oh.
Forces withdrew on the 27th
but
across the peninsula to the hill
though.
Akibaba, and there they fended off British attackers. The British didn't even take their first objective, the village of Krithia. From first to last, the Narrows remained under Turkish control. And it must be said, there were times when the scale of incompetent leadership made a mockery of the bravery of the Allied troops. On the Turkish side, though the generals were German, the inspiration of Mustafa Kemal helped keep the invading forces stuck at the beachheads. But the landings themselves had succeeded, and people throughout Europe...
So if it had not been for one man, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, this landing could have gone a lot differently? Is this what he's insinuating here?
Were so confident of an imminent Allied victory that on the 26th, Italy signed a secret treaty committing her to joining the Allies, and on Gallipoli, ever more reinforcements were brought in on both sides. That's right, Italy had just committed itself to joining the war. This would involve attacking Austria-Hungary at the other end of the country from where the Austrian armies had been desperately fighting the Russians in the Carpathians. But things weren't as desperate for the empire as they'd been only a few weeks ago. German reinforcements in the nick of time had prevented the Russians from breaking out of the mountains and onto the Hungarian plains. And more German troops were arriving in secret, preparing for yet another offensive, but this time with heavy German forces. This week also saw another major milestone date, as April 24th was declared the Armenian Day of Mourning. That day, Catholicos Georg V, head of the Armenian Church, appealed in vain to American President Woodrow Wilson to intervene in what was turning from massacres to Armenian genocide.
Just want to make it clear here. Fuck Woodrow Wilson. One of the worst presidents. Fuck that guy. Fucking white supremacist. You know, a lot of us presidents were a bit white supremacy, but this guy was really bad. And I think, I mean, something else I want to say, but then like it's like not entirely true. You could also kind of point to Woodrow Wilson as the reasoning why the United States is the way it is today. I think it's become popular to do that. However, you could really say that started before the turn of the century. Oh, just an additional thing there.
Genocide.
Fuck Woodrow Wilson. He sucks.
News of the killings and deportations of Armenians in Turkey, which had been going on for 2 weeks now, became widely publicized throughout Europe and the United States. On April 28th, the German vice consul at Erzurum, Max Erwin von Scheubner-Richter, was asked by Berlin to intervene against the massacres, but not in any way that would interfere with the activities of the authorities. So, do nothing. I mention him because, as a side note, von Scheubner-Richter was, after the war, one of the first supporters of Adolf Hitler.
Oh.
He was killed in the Beer Hall Push in Munich in 1923, marching by Hitler's side.
Good.
Anyway,
he died.
Also on April
Fantastic.
24th, 250 Armenian intellectuals were arrested in Istanbul. They were sent to Shankri and Ayash, where they were later killed. And further east, tens of thousands of Armenians under siege in the city of Van still held out. But in Van province, 32,000 Armenians were reported killed by the end of April. And the killing continued in the west as well, as the Second Battle of Ypres raged throughout the week near Saint-Julien. The Germans actually pierced the British lines on the 26th, but by the end of the week, their offensive is halted. And that was the week, a week of milestones still remembered today. The Gallipoli landings that thrust the soldiers of Australia and New Zealand into the fray for the first time, the spotlight shining on Mustafa Kemal, and more sinister, the official beginning of the Armenian Genocide. And the Italians would go to war. And the Germans and Austrians would tackle the Russians again. And the Western Front would remain a stubborn stalemate. There were so many ways to die that in hindsight, opening yet another front seems almost a criminal waste of life. But it was still happening again and again, and it was certainly not happening well.
Sadly, when it comes to war, opening up another front is the only way to do it, because essentially it comes to the concept of smaller battles in which you try and flank your opponent and get around them and envelop them and encircle them and get them to surrender in that way. And essentially, opening up another front is doing the same thing. It's spreading out your forces, but also trying to make sure that the enemy is spreading out more than you are. Right? You want to stretch them to their limits while not going past your own. Right? You want to be able to support all of these multiple fronts on your own, but make sure the enemy is not able to do so. And if they keep being able to support the multiple fronts, then you keep adding another front and another front until they are incapable of handling their forces being spread out. And so it just goes down to what is a minor a tactic used in small-scale battles also is translated into the wider scale. Sadly, that's how war has to be fought.
This week at the Dardanelles, the seas actually...
Because if you're keeping it to one front, kind of like what the Western Front currently is between Germany and France and Britain, is it just turns into a slaughter. No one's making ground, but a lot of people are still dying. Whereas, at least the idea of opening up another front, you could at least justify it in the sense that you're making an attempt to find another way to try and end the war faster. Whereas if you're just sending men out to die on the same front day after day, and nothing's moving, that doesn't really feel like a proper attempt, in my opinion. I would rather, if I had to be put into war, even though I wouldn't have a choice in where I get sent, but if I could have the choice, I would rather choose to die. I would probably rather choose to die in Gallipoli than I would on the Western Front. because at least in Gallipoli, the idea there would be that my death is being used as an attempt to try and find a way to end the war faster, right? Whereas Western Front, you're kind of just seeing your buddies die day after day, and nothing's happening. So even if Gallipoli fails, it's still like an attempt was made. Whereas the Western Front's kind of the same shit day after day. Yeah.
Actually ran red with blood. Do you realize how frightening that is? How that must have looked?
Yeah.
But this Allied plan of Winston Churchill's, this back door to win the war, how ill-conceived was the whole concept to begin with? Germany was not...
And of course, yeah, the British definitely... This is one of the... I'm actually going to disagree with him a bit here. Because they're already in the war, and although the beginnings of the war are stupid, and that this war should never have even happened, the idea itself of Gallipoli isn't bad. It's just that the British were overconfident in themselves and completely disregarded the Ottoman Empire. Despite the losses of the Ottoman Empire being when the Ottoman Empire goes on the offensive, right? So far, we haven't seen the Ottoman Empire losing too badly when it comes to the defense. And that is the mistake that I think the British made. They did not acknowledge that.
Going to be beaten by an attack on Turkey. There was no back door to attacking Germany. There were no allies whose removal would make Germany collapse. Gallipoli is often romanticized in films and books, but for all of the individual moments of glory, it was an exercise in butchery, pure and simple.
Yeah.
And it was butchery that caused misery at the home front, tore apart families, and demanded that women pay a high price working in ammunition factories and taking on other duties at home. You can click here to check out our...
Oh boy, we're over 20 minutes. Whoa, I think this might be the longest Great War episode yet. I had a lot to say for this one because, well, a lot happened. And it didn't... Time flew for this episode. I really enjoyed this one. Just because I love that this was a week where he was able to take the time to dive deep into an offensive, right? And that's what I think worked really well for this episode, is that he took the time, that the show here took the time to dive deep into the Battle of Gallipoli. And I think it worked really well. But they also still talked about all the other events that were happening in brief, but still typically what they do. But since Gallipoli is such a massive thing, they gave it the time that I felt it needed. And then still also provided a good amount of time to what you could say is the true start of the Armenian Genocide. Yeah, that was the Sea Turns Red, landing at Gallipoli, the Great War, week 40. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.